Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to Lunar Alchemy. My name is John. With me from the woods is Bella. And we are here today to discuss the transit of the sun through gate 34, the movement in the gene keys from the shadow of force to the city of majesty, and is through the gift of strength. And our archetype that we're working with here today is the Black Panther, and the elements are thunder over heaven. So an interesting energetic structure to contemplate as we look into the nature of this very primal energy that is moving with us at this time. So, Bella, who is the Black Panther? And how does she work?
She's definitely one of my favorites, and I feel like she's such a role model for where we're going in everything that's happening in the world now, and coming up to 2027, where we have the 34 as one of the 4 main gates in that cross. So for me, it's definitely about individual empowerment. And then from that individual empowerment, that's where I believe that the 34 is going to be able to inspire others to come back to their truth, and to also, not from a place of selfishness, but from a place of self-empowerment, walk the world and feel into what's right. And I feel also the connection with nature and your own life force and all these things that are helping you to be aligned and not kind of outsource your guidance to something outside of yourself.
Yes, this particular energy is an interesting one because of how it functions through our form. And a lot of times that individuality is an experience that is very, very separate from other forms of individuation around us. But I believe that actually has to do with the way that the awareness just manifests through this particular energy. And so this is another one of those gene keys that is a little bit funny to contemplate with our minds, because this is another one that really has very little to do with our thinking brains in terms of the ideas that we have access to, and really is more about movement. This is kind of the definition of thunder from the I Ching. It's the fire in the sky that generates movement, which, if you think about that within the human body, the fire that creates movement is the electricity of the nervous. So when we look at this particular energy, Bella, you mentioned that it has something to do with where we're all headed in our evolutionary path. And I wonder if there's a little bit more you wanted to say about that, because I haven't looked at this particular cross of what you're looking at there and what that might kind of entail for what are we as humanity going through when we come to this particular transit, or when we contemplate this particular gene key. What's the path look like? What does it mean to walk the path of strength? And how is that preparing us for the future?
Yeah, I definitely feel that the 34 speaks to us about movement and harmonic movement. So it's actually about more and more allowing nature, allowing life force, allowing energy to move you, instead of forcing things to go a certain way. And I think that we can speak about that in physical movement sense, also in mental movement, like how we can force things to be a certain way, like with that kind of mental forcing, or with a physical forcing. And I feel that possibly in the cross of planning, where we have been with gate 16, 9, 37, and 40, which a lot of detail, and now we have been, for the last period of time, the last few hundred years, we've been in a first line reality. And definitely it's more tangible. I don't think it's going to be that tangible when we come into the cross of the sleeping phoenix, which has the 59, the 55, the 34, and the 20. And I definitely believe that if we are going to be able to navigate that new reality, we need to be sourced from the inside, and we need to work with the rhythms and with what's natural. I think more and more we are tuned into what's artificial, the more kind of hit or miss it's going to be. So the 34 as well, it's there was no force in the evolution from being an animal to being a human. It was a natural step that happened, right? So I feel as well that movement from 4-legged to 2-legged, and what is the next iteration of human? I mean, that there has been evolution since we started to walk on 2 legs to where we are now. And I think that there is an acceleration in that as well.
Mm. Yeah, our last conversation was around gene key 43, and we touched a little bit on this code of destiny that 34 creates together with it. And when I'm thinking about what you're saying, I'm thinking about movement. And ironically, when I think about movement with this gene key from the entire spectrum of possibility that this energy provides, what I start to think about is stillness. And that's because of this quality of efficiency, that the higher the frequency goes, the more efficiency increases in terms of our movements. And when I think about this idea that you're sharing about moving into this new paradigm of reality, the cross of the sleeping phoenix, and allowing our awareness to shift from our sort of brain-focused mental center, thought, idea, perhaps intellect center, down into the solar plexus. I think about this almost instinctual movement of awareness that the 34 is such a fantastic expression of, in that the energy moves through the body. And when we respond to that in a clear and pure way, then the energy of the world can be mutated to support that movement in greater ways. And when I think about what does that mean from an individual standpoint, it's like we're moving from this state of trying to use our minds to correlate past experience to a projection of future experiences through our choices in the present moment. And we just kind of move into this state of almost non-thinking awareness, where the present moment is the only one that we kind of consider, and somehow it takes care of both the past and the future at once. And from my mental standpoint, this idea, it feels like an alchemy of timelines. Like, how do we both integrate everything from our past choices and sort of mutate everything in the future that is coming to move into this harmonious present? And we're going to be able to do it without any intellectual involvement whatsoever. And I don't know if there's if there are some ideas you have about this way this works through an individual or through the groups, but it's like, how do we move into that state? What are the qualities that we may need to cultivate in order to embrace this level of awareness from where we currently happen to be? You know, wherever we are on that spectrum of whether it's worry and anxiety or depression and sorrow from the past, you know, like where is this movement going to come from in terms of this gene key?
You know, as you speak, what I keep seeing, and it's almost like I can't almost listen to the words, but I keep seeing the coloring of destiny. And I keep seeing those two movements where the 34 is actually bringing us up, you know, in the evolution of consciousness. Like, it's bringing us up, I believe, from some of that animal instinct of just, you know, either, like you say, go into some of those shadow states, or just kind of brutally, in a way, using our energy. We are becoming more refined. We're circulating the energy up through the heart and through, like, more awareness, more evolution. And then I see the 43, the opposite direction. That is that insight that drops in and comes in. And I almost see it's like it's two Merkabahs, like one kind of going up as we are becoming humans, two-legged, and our awareness expands, and then the other one just kind of suddenly coming down and then meeting, and it feels like that's the Merkaba that goes the other way. And somehow that is the answer to anything and everything that we have, that we become that vessel for evolution that happens. And again, I feel reminded that this is individual circuitry. So the 34 is in integration channels, super individual. How did we survive? Like, why did we survive? Because we have the power, you know, something, and then that those genes continue, and then that kind of pulse of the 61 and the 24 and the 43, the 23, like the way it comes in from the mystery, from the bigger into form. So I believe that's what we are awakening to, that process that is going on. But how can we crack even more open so that we can become aware and see in each other the beauty of those Merkabas happening in our evolution in the moment.
Yeah, when you're talking about that, it feels like what's happening in the brain is like, or our mind, the mind level. Interesting to talk about the mind with this gene key because of how it interrelates with the involution. But it feels like this efficiency theme is the very movement itself is something which can be used to help refine the movements of the mind. So part of that process of getting stuck in our heads or kind of looping around in these sort of mental patterns that are never ending sort of gets broken when we move our awareness into movement, whether it's some form of exercise that we're choosing, or, you know, we're bringing our awareness more directly into our physical bodies. I mean, one of the things, Bella, you talk about so often is the awareness coming into the body, and how this evolutionary process of humanity right now is so body focused from obviously a choice level of perspective. But when we see that choice embraced by people, we're able to experience those higher frequency levels of self-assurance that comes from the programming partner of the 34 and the strength in them. And they kind of begin to express those archetypes of the hero and the Black Panther that we watch and we admire and we aspire to be like. And I sometimes have this feeling of like, wow, we're sitting here having a discussion on the internet, or we're listening to the discussion and allowing our thoughts to kind of wander and everything. And I wonder about how deeply we can move our awareness just into our physical presence. And while we're listening to something or speaking about something, how aware are we of the sensation in our toes or the sensation on our butts in our seats? You know, it's like our awareness is so very frequently shifted away from our physical body and into more mental processing movements. And I think that's partly why we see, like in our collective, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is just a part of the process of growing populations or the variation of expression that's happening today. But if you look at all of the different ways that people can exercise their bodies, whether it's yoga, Pilates, bar, CrossFit, weightlifting, people still do aerobics from the 80s, you know, there's just so many different choices and ways that we can engage with our bodies. And yet our society, it still feels as if it's like this thing that we squeeze into 3 times a week or 30 minutes a day or whatever it is that we do. And it makes me wonder how this shift that's upcoming in consciousness, will this end up becoming something that is a much greater focus for us? Will we end up spending more time, instead of using our minds and thinking all the time, just being present with the movement of our physical bodies, and how might that shift our society and our individual experience of it? I mean, you were talking about nature, and how many people today are so drawn to go spend time in physical nature, particularly if we're sensitive to the movements of collective emotional stuff or patterns happening in our society. It's like we just want to unplug and go out into nature and enjoy our bodies out in nature. And it just makes me consider, like, what is it that we are prioritizing on a daily basis, and how can we continue to engage with society as it is while using our physical bodies in this expanded way, from, you know, maybe just those 3 times a week or 30 minutes a day, or, you know, really never, because we've kind of fallen into patterns of couch potatoism, you know.
I feel when you speak, I do feel like you're connecting this also to the fact that it is the energy of the sacral, and the sacral is a motor, and there's always this regeneration of the motor. So when we speak about stillness here, I feel like it's that, in a way, stillness in the movement, the way that is no efforting. So when you see a Black Panther, which is the archetype, when you see them in movement, it doesn't look like they're efforting, not even when they are hunting and they go so fast. It just looks so natural. So I feel like there is I see in the chat as well, coming back to a more natural movement where there is a flow, or there's this state where there's no effort. Definitely. I'm also thinking about the sacral center in the 34 being the only gate in the sacral that isn't sexual. And it's almost like, for me, when I think about that, it is using all of the energy that's there for aliveness. It's not using it for reproduction. It's not using it for sex. It's not using it for urges, right? I actually have only the 34 in my sacral, I have no other sacral gates. And I also, from my own perspective with the 34, I know that not being available is something that resonates a lot for me with this archetype, with this gate. And when I'm not available for outside influence or for other people, usually it is because I am occupied, busy, doing something that is very in my individual flow, very much in my, and it has really a kind of Bella unique flavor to it. And I think that people might not really understand, like, what is she doing? But I've needed that since I was a child. And it's very, like I say, again, it's very intuitive and individual. I have the 57 in the spleen twice and the 34 twice. There are those moments when I just need to use this sacral energy in a way that intuitively feels right for me. And I feel like that's something, you have the 34 as well, even possibly even more strong because it's in your activation sequence, to allow ourselves to have those moments where we aren't available, and also to see, okay, if I'm not available for others, what's the movement that wants to come through? Because like you say, we can be conditioned to be busy and then kind of transfer that to the mind. But if we're busy doing our thing, including the body, what would that be? And I remember you know, when you were here, I can see both of us are very physical, like archetypes or something, you know, like you can feel that 34 in us. It's there, it's palpable that it's there. And I feel as well, like I don't know if that's true for everyone, but a lot of people that have the 34, there are those people, like you were saying a few times ago, like if you work out, you become fit really fast. You know, it's like there's a muscle memory that is not even from this lifetime. It seemed to be before this lifetime. That's there, and it's very apparent.
Mm. Yeah, it's like the fit. I love that you mentioned that this gate is the one in the sacral that is the only non-sexual energy that is focused fully on just life force, because it connects, that idea connects to the original primal need of life to simply survive. And in doing so, there's really only a couple of things that life needs to do. It needs to consume, which is doing whatever it takes to intake the energy for the processes that it goes through, whether that's absorbing light from the sun or it's consuming some form of other life, plant, animal, whatever it is. And then life needs to procreate in order for life to continue. And these are the two processes. And I haven't considered that idea that the 34 is the only purely non-sexual energy before. But when you say that, it really, because of the activation that I have, because the 34 is in my purpose, it feels that there is a massive level of importance for my individual experience to take part in activities that both express my life energy, and in that expression brings the possibility for me to absorb some kind of energetic reflection that gives me more opportunity to continue expressing that life force. It's almost like, when we look at the animals that human beings are regularly connected with, dogs, cats, horses, the livestock that we consume, chickens, pigs, cows. And we're looking at our society, it's like, are these animals allowed to just express their physical nature in the most natural way? Are horses allowed to just run through the fields and then do their sort of horsey things like grazing on grass or whatever? Are cows allowed to do that same thing, wandering from field to field, looking for the new growths for them to eat? Are dogs allowed to connect into packs so that they can express their individuality? Or not their individuality, but their role within the collective group. And it just starts to make me think about, okay, well, what is a human being physically built to express? And then how can we in that more? And it brings me to this idea of like this original idea of survival, like this impulse of life force to seek more life. What does that mean through a human being? And it brings me to this idea of artisanship, of artistry in movement, in physical form. In fact, while I was even considering this gene key, I was thinking about how incredibly physical my exploration of learning and mastering a musical instrument was, just about the physical aspect of it. And yes, of course, sound plays a huge role in it, but over time, I realized more and more and more how important the physical level of it was for me. And so, when I think about this idea in this sort of context that feels like we're kind of building up in this discussion, it's like, how can we move our body in the most artistic way possible? How can we have awareness in every single movement that we make when we are preparing breakfast, whether that's Pop-Tarts in the toaster, or you're making an omelet, or you're having, whatever it is that you do for breakfast, just a cup of coffee and a little something to eat. How much artistry are you bringing into your physical body while you're doing these sort of mundane activities? Can you brush your teeth in an artistic way? It's like, and I feel as if that kind of eventually leads into some of those higher forms of physical movement, whether that's yoga or calligraphy, or the practice of like trimming a bonsai tree. Like, I feel like these sort of arts are really deeply connected to this gene key in a way where what they're seeking is the possibility for that involution to express itself through the physical form that's present.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and I want to share this because I feel when you're speaking about artists moving the body in a certain way, when we look at the channels, the 34 create in the body graph, and we look at the gift frequency, we have charisma, conviction, and power. And it feels that, this is what the artist need to be. It needs to convince somebody, otherwise nobody's going to look at the art or listen to the art. And then charisma, of course, that's that contagious part of it. And then the kind of more essential power that we have in the 34, 57. And then I also feel that the beauty of the cities, embodiment, essence, and ritual. Like, that is, as we are evolving, because again, this is the stream of self-awareness or centeredness. This is the integration channels. So as we are evolving, like we're saying, again, bringing up more of our life force higher up in the chakras, higher up in awareness, well, then embodiment, essence, and ritual. And ritual for me here is more like the dance of life. Like I often say, like, my life is ritual, my life is ceremony. It's not that I sit in ceremony and then I go and live my everyday life. No, more and more, just part of what life is. The flow of life, or the response to life, becomes a ceremony. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say that idea from the sacral of the flow, and letting life force flow through your entire body, rather than kind of getting distracted by the requirements of life, expanding our awareness so that flow can be present with us as we move through everything, so that even if we are performing a ritual, when we get up and go about our quote unquote regular life, that we begin to experience some of that sacred ritual through every movement. This is actually, I've forgotten the exact the Sanskrit name for it, but in yoga there is a practice of open-eyed moving meditation, where you simply practice being in a meditative state with everything that you do throughout the entire day. So as you're walking, you bring your presence into every single step. As you're making a phone call, or scrolling on social media, you pay attention to the sensations that are happening in your body as you're doing so. And like, what is the movement going on? Can you meditate while scrolling on social media? It really seems like an interesting place to kind of focus our attention. But I feel as if it's something that, if a Black Panther could use social media, that's what it would do. It would like explore in such a deep way, deeply connected to itself, that whatever's happening on the social media would have very little influence over the inner experience, except that it allows that inner experience to respond to the environment. And gosh, when I say that, it makes me think about this gene key from such a perspective of total separation, where it's like, well, there's me, and then there's the environment, and that includes everything, everything that isn't me. And at some point in this process of going so deeply into oneself, that self dissolves in this extraordinary leap into higher consciousness. And this gift of strength, it's kind of an interesting title for this gift, because we often think of, from that last slide that you showed, the strength that is often expressed through brutality, that channel where you see the manifestation of violence into action, and from this particular gene key, it feels like that strength, that inner strength of the Black Panther, is a really different description from that forceful movement. And I don't know, it makes me wonder, how much brutality do we each carry directed inwardly towards ourselves? I don't know if that's where you were thinking of, Bella, to go, but
Yeah, that one is, I feel that I want to show something, like just another way of looking at it. And let's start with just looking, not, you don't have to think so much about the word. So I think exactly what you're saying. This is Sagittarius energy. And if we take that energy and we point it inwards, I have felt that sometimes with my solar plexus chakra. If I take all the fire in my solar plexus and I don't know how to use it in a constructive way, I can burn myself completely. I've had like the physical and the emotional experience of that. And I think here, Sagittarius energy, fire energy, heaven and thunder, that it is important. And the word here, it says in Spanish, but the word here is to intend. And you can see that's actually what Sagittarius does. It's intending. You have that much power. So what are you actually aiming at? What are you intending with it? I think that's important. And I feel you that have 30, 34 and 20, I that have 34 and 57, like it can be very busy without actually being constructive. So with that intention, I feel like that's actually how we can create an intention. I think it's important to make that clarification. Doesn't mean forcing. Having an intention doesn't have to be forceful. It's more like an inner seed than anything else. And I also like how the symbol here to kind of meditate on, like the meditation card that Sergio created for this, looks very much like that Mars symbol or the masculine symbol, although the masculine symbol has this 140-degree kind of tilt, and here it's just the big power that just, the power that goes right up. And then just the keywords I think are important too. So intend so that your power can be expressed. So again, it's not so much about like, at least not pointing it inwards. Yeah, feel the liveness, let the liveness move you and all that. But there is also something here that wants to go out into the world, that wants to, again, evolve, express. And then the other keyword is to create abundance. So intend so that the power can express through you, and then create abundance with that intention. That's the way that in Abaxis, that Sergio Arboleda has interpreted this hexagram in the I Ching. And he also includes the gene key frequency band. So he's also a synthesizer in many ways. So yeah, do you have something with this, John, or do you want me to go to the normal elements?
Well, it just makes me think about that, because we haven't discussed it very much, that aspect of power. And what does that really mean? And when we use intention to direct the power of our energy without forcefulness, it seems as if there's this sort of sweet spot that we get to find, I think often through experimentation, about how do we actually use intention to harness our inner power. And when we do so, what does that even mean? You know, like if we're using our inner power, like there's a lot of this idea of creating abundance. There's a lot of thought experimentation happening around what thoughts should we think in order to experience the abundance of prosperity. You know, what sort of thoughts shouldn't we think in order to do the same, that is gonna, you know, because those are going to guide us away from that experience. And when I look at those ideas, I'm like, oh, most of this is about connecting to something from inside the body, from a presence and an awareness of inner power that is really about connection. And that arrow, that movement outwards, if you look at that symbol of the Mars symbol with it pointing straight up and the arrow going straight up, you have a circle, which alchemically speaking is the whole. Like a sphere is the expression of every possibility of movement from a singular point, just contained in a certain way. And if you look at the possibilities of geometric expression, that's also what a sphere expresses. A sphere contains every single other geometry that is possible between any series of points. So we've got this totality of wholeness and then an expression moving upwards. And to me, it's like that describes what power is taking that totality of wholeness and moving it upwards with an intention. And as that occurs, abundance is just created, because that upward movement, you know, whether you see it as a spout and it kind of like reigns over everything in the environment, or it's just a movement from the sacral moving up inside our bodies, up into our higher awareness centers, there's going to be a massive expansion of consciousness through the entire system. And yeah, that just seemed like that's what was coming through to me from Sergio's interpretation, and just wanted to speak to that for a moment, because it's like, well, what are we doing when we're bringing awareness into our movements, whether it's yoga or, you know, artful toothbrushing? Yeah. So do you want to look at thunder? You want to look at heaven, the elements?
Yeah, I like how here the timing, the natural timing comes in, you know, the movement with the timing. So awakening the creative essence in alignment with divine timing. So that inherent in this 34, we have the heaven hexagram, which is prime yang, which has to do with the pulse and the timing. And I feel the same thing with 34, like together with thunder, and possibly also the 51, which is the other one. So if you are a little bit new to the braid, the way that we look at it is that we have the elemental trigrams, 8 of them that are making up the hexagram. So if we look at heaven, it's the same thing it's the same essence as Jinki 1, because that's heaven over heaven. So entropy, freshness, and beauty. And when we look at thunder over thunder, thunder is the same as the 51st Jinki, because 51st Jinki is thunder over thunder. So agitation, initiative, and awakening. And I'm feeling, as we're breaking it up to Jinki 1, or the energy of Jinki 1 and 51 that is making up the 34, again, we are continuing to see individual circuitry. So it's that pulse, that timing, that awakening breakthrough that we have in the 51. And then the braid becomes, in the shadow frequency, force is agitated entropy, strength is the initiative of freshness, majesty is awakened beauty. And definitely the one that I resonate with is the city here. Sometimes the city feels like so kind of out there, but majesty is awakened beauty. I really like that one.
Yeah, it's really, really beautiful, because when we look at that word majesty, of course, we connect it with royalty and the hierarchical forms of society. And we're like, but there's also a sort of different connotation for it, where the majesty of nature, for instance, and we think about that and we're like, well, what does that really mean? It's one of the words in sort of our like the anthems of the US, and poetry that's kind of about the patriotic love of the country, majesty. Well, it's awakened beauty. And I love the definition of the gift level, because when we look at strength, we're often considering strength within the context of what we may see as its opposite, strength and weakness. But here, strength is the initiative of freshness, and strength is juxtaposed against force, which is an agitation of entropy. And when we think about freshness, this is this sort of like this spark of life force that comes from within and provides something that is truly original, because it comes through something, an individuated form, which is by nature completely original. And strength is just the initiation of that process of movement. So I just love this particular braid, because here we can spend all this time discussing the ideas around these words and what does it mean and what do we do with it and everything. But for some reason, this particular braid feels so simple in understanding it, with just enough awareness of what do these words actually refer to from the other gene keys, gene key 1 and 51 that we're talking about in the braid. And when you see strength as the initiative of freshness, it's just kind of like this completely free expression that is set into motion through this spark, this impulse that comes through us and then expressed through the movement of our bodies. And it's just to me, this is just such a beautiful braid and describes so well how we can engage on this.
Yeah, and I have to say, after looking at this with you now and hearing you speak, I definitely feel that the essence of the 34 is more masculine than feminine. Like looking at the braid and the prime yang in the heaven hexagram and then the thunder, I definitely feel, and even like, when we see that this initiative of freshness, yeah, that sounds like the masculine, like eros. And when we are looking also what Sergio had with like that arrow and the bow, like that also feels like very pointing at something. So definitely the quality of the masculine, the beautiful quality of the masculine is what I see in this hexagram after diving deeper and looking at the elements and the essence of it.
Absolutely. So there's a Q&A question, and I think this came up in the chat as well, and I thought it was a really interesting topic from Clayton. What are your views on correct communications, like how we communicate with our bodies correctly, but also how to communicate in pairs and groups properly? There are rules, so to speak. And when I think about this gene key in relationship to communication, we have this sacral gate, and what that implies is responsiveness, and to some extent waiting to respond. And when we look at communication, all the majority of our communication between human beings that we think about has to do with the words that we speak, the tone that we use, and things of that nature. And what is less in the collective awareness is the communication that happens, generally speaking, unconsciously through our bodies, through posture, through expressions on the face, through little movements of the face. A few months back, there was a crazy amount of coverage of the legal proceedings between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. And I saw in that coverage a lot of analysis around both Johnny Depp's and Amber Heard's testimonies about their facial expressions and what was truly being communicated despite the words that they were using. And while what I'm sharing about doesn't specifically talk about what is correct communication, it does speak to this level of unawareness that we have around what it is we are truly communicating on an energetic level through our physical presence. And there was just so much discussion about, well, you can see how with this movement of the face, Amber Heard is clearly lying or hiding something or blah, blah, blah. And then you could say here, clearly Johnny Depp is expressing some deep wound in his chuckles and like whatever it is. And so he's clearly being authentic here, blah, blah, blah. It kind of went on and on about these analyses because it was such a juxtaposition in what was being shown. And when I think about the idea of communication through the 34, it really truly has to do with our awareness developing to the level that there's no longer an unawareness of these movements of the physical body that are expressing particular things that are basically unconscious for us, meaning it's information or data that exists at the cellular level within our physical bodies and is being expressed by our physical bodies without our emotional or mental awareness being engaged. And even though this particular gene key is generally said, oh, this is one of the unaware gates, it doesn't mean that we can be unaware of them. I think at the acidic level, there's no longer expressions of the face or the body that are communicating something different from what other aspects of our being are communicating, like our words. And probably a person in that acidic level is going to use words extraordinarily sparingly and extraordinarily efficiently because their body is already communicating everything that needs to be communicated. So, Bella, I don't know if you have other thoughts on that, or I thought also the idea about communicating with our bodies, that sort of internal communication, was a pretty interesting one.
Yeah, I feel it's fascinating. And the more that we actually become aware of how bodies speak, I feel that a whole new world is opening up. And I think that not everybody is. Actually, a little while ago, my partner explained to me something about the person, like, I can't be fooled, this and this and this and this. And he told me everything about how it changed from like being a posture that was in one way to kind of just being this, and then how the neck was and everything. And I'm like, wow. And it's like, well, I'm a professional dancer. Like, you can fool me with anything, with your words, with like, but you can't, with your body, you can't fool me. It's impossible. And it was fascinating, like, because that's the kind of intelligence that we sometimes don't even think about as intelligence. But everything I could see as he was telling me, I could see the whole kind of chain, how that person just shifted. And it was not because of speaking, it was just the body language, the posture that completely shifted and changed. So I feel like definitely there is so much there. And don't they say that there's only 7% that are the words, and then we have the tone and we have the body language and all that in our communication. And then I guess that there's a part of me that a little bit, when I feel this question of like what's correct, like not, it wasn't framed like that, but like for me, I interpret it a little bit like what's the correct interpretation, what are the rules? And I guess with all my individual circuitry and the 34, I'm like, there's no correct communication, don't come and put rules here. So I can see that happening in myself at the same time, or at least I don't want to be the one saying this is correct communication. However, I do see that there is communication that works and that doesn't work. I have loads of fourth lines in my hologenetic profile. So and my main interest from a mechanical standpoint is to get my truth across. And my whole life, I've been testing different ways to get my truth across or not. And I mean, I think actually lately I've been ready to be a bit humble and actually be more silent, because I know there is no point. And forcing, like I'm really good at forcing with that 34 as well. So I feel like respect and reciprocity are my main words for communication, like making sure that there is like making sure that there is both a listening and a speaking, like whether that is in a group call with the translates, whether that is in a conversation I have with somebody. If I'm just going to tell them the truth, like, yeah, I can do that, and my ego kind of likes that, but it's always so important that there is a giving and a receiving, or a listening and a receiving, and then holding ourselves accountable for that respect. And then also being aware that what is respect for me might be interpreted not as respectful from somebody else. But the intention, I think, again, with that thing, like, what are you, like, where are you shooting? What are you aiming at? Is that with respect or not? So those two for me are so important in communication, in relationship. And that's the same thing with my body. Like I can tell my body, visualize my body, you're healthy, you're beautiful, you're all that, but it also is me listening to the body. So that reciprocity. And then the respect of not forcing my body. The days I have slept 2 hours and I still think I need to be an hour on the treadmill because that's what I do every morning. What is that correct relationship again, where love, I guess love is that bottom line for how we relate, with whom we relate, doesn't matter. All relationships that are based on love, respect, and reciprocity are kind of good relationships and good communication.
Yeah, I think on some level, all rules essentially boil down to love, particularly from the Gene Keys perspective. So I think I feel as if we've really gotten a full picture of the possibilities of this particular energy, and the idea of this energy moving through our physical form as that direct expression of divinity. And so from a certain standpoint, it feels as if that love being directed toward both the divinity that is coming through, as well as the body that is the expression of it, is really, really one of the keys. And because we have thunder over heaven, we're going to move to the transmission. Thunder is of the fire element, the electrical level of fire. And heaven, of course, is of the air, the sky. And we're going to step into that energetic transmission, which for those of you, if you haven't experienced one of those, it is a transmission of frequency that comes essentially from the realms of higher consciousness, and allows our physical being to move into a state of integrative communication with those frequencies. And we practice those every week with our discussion with our members in Lunar Alchemy. We're going to continue on with that now. So thank you all for joining us. I want to wish each of you a very present and majestic Thanksgiving. May you experience your own divinity through your own body over this holiday, and sending loving presence to your heart from mine. We'll look forward to seeing you again next Monday, if you're able to join us for our next discussion. So, thank you, Bella.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. We'll say bye-bye for now, and we'll move on to our transmission. So have a beautiful rest of your holiday.